Hi. Good to see you.
Morning.
Good to see you too. Sorry not to see you live.
Yeah,
Maybe we could be thinking to do it live because the quarantine is over. But definitely this is the last online event, and the next will be live event in September. But colleagues, let me welcome all of you to EBN business breakfast. It used to be a business breakfast with a coffee and good meeting and handshaking. And today we still do it remote. Hopefully the last time we are meeting remote, and we look forward very much. Really, we are longing to see each other and to discuss and have a friendly atmosphere. But today we do it in this sunny weather and nice mood. And I know that somebody are joining the meeting and the breakfast from the lake side, not necessarily from office. Last meeting we had people joining from the foreign countries. I don't know about this time, but let's see later. But with this nice day, and with these days we are closing, the country is closing quarantine regime for this pandemic. And of course we have been thinking on the impact on us, on society, on business, and especially now when this stage is over, it's already time to draw some conclusions. And that is an idea of today. And for this purpose, we invited Elena Leontjeva, the founder and the president of Lithuanian Free Market Institute. She will be maybe one of best persons to talk on the global view and on the global impact of pandemic to people, to everybody, to society, to country, to government, to business. Of course, majority of us are business owners or top managers. We would be very interesting to look forward what impact will be on the business and economy as such. But and Elena will touch topics from her own perspective, and we know that from your Elena publication, we know that you have been thinking, the high level thinking on the social issues, and we would be happy that you could join us to share your view. But colleagues, let me still, if not everybody familiar with Elena, mention that Elena Leontjeva is the co-founder of the Lithuanian Free Market Institute back in 2001. And now in this year, she returned back to the rule of the institute, and we look forward to developments and publications of this institute. But in Elena's career, she has played a different role. She has been an advisor, economic advisor to President Valdas Adamkus, and state councilor, and she contributed to the main, let's say, economic rules in Lithuania, to the Litas credibility law, to currency board development. So these basic economic drivers that shape the society. So we are really happy that we have Elena, you now among us today. And now I would like to open the floor and ask you for your insight. But before doing that, colleagues, here on the Microsoft Teams, we have the chat box. If you press on this text message icon on the bottom part of the screen, you will see the who's participating in the meeting, and in the bottom right corner there is a place for type a message. So if you have questions, if the questions arise during the presentation, please type your questions here, and after the Lena's presentation, we will discuss on those questions you raised. Also, there is a possibility after the presentation, there is a possibility to speak. You can press on the hand on this little menu, and you raise the hand, and then I invite you to speak and or to ask. So let's start our meeting. Elena, please, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for a very kind introduction. And the Institute has been established in 1990, so we are as old as Lithuania's independence, and we have been instrumental in building the major grounds of how people act in economic field, how they communicate, the money we use, the taxes we pay, all of those subjects have been either coming from the Institute or significantly impacted by the Institute. Not to mention the securities market and stock exchange, which we established in Lithuania as early as the Czechs. In 1992, 1993, we already had starting securities market and stock exchange. But this topic I would like to start a little bit earlier. As a kid, I was raised in the very center of Vilnius, near that hill where the new concert hall will be built soon. Probably you know that place well. And in those nice light evenings in June, we as kids were outside very freely, and the parents were not afraid to let us be in the yard. And I remember that the only fear we all shared were the bats, which were sometimes coming from the big trees growing on the hill. So those bats, flying mice, so to say, they were something out of our control. And I remember that fear that we shared at that time. So the humanity today is in a similar condition. We felt almost all-powerful, almost immortal. The transhumanist movement assured us that the question of human immortality is just a question of a few decades. And the globalization went very far to the margins, so everything was interconnected. And it looked like there is nothing which would be out of the power of a human being. And suddenly this small bat, this small invisible virus changes the whole life of the human civilization. So it's really now a good time to rethink some of the major lessons, and probably all of us are still not able to communicate directly, felt that one of the biggest challenges for us was to find out how much we need the other, how much we need social communication. That this is really a part of our nature, and even to meet and not to be able to shake hands somehow impacts our dignity. So this was a nice reminding from the small virus to the humanity. And another one is the connection that we all have between each other and with the state. What is the role of the state? And this is the subject of my talk today. We all acted very quickly when we learned about the virus. The businesses, people being on a private trips, everyone had to act promptly, to take decision and to move, to change the business operation. And really we showed our human capacity to respond to the challenges. The governments also acted, and in some countries like in Germany and in Switzerland, I dare to say that the governments really showed a very deep understanding of the role of the government to protect the people and not to inflict any new insecurity on the people. So if we look on the economic part of the picture, the way that those governments issued compensations, transfers, whatever the word we use, to the people in the lockdown sectors, to people self-employed, people involved in the cultural life and so on, really showed a very deep understanding that the role of the government, the role of the state is to protect people, not only from foreign danger and so on, but to protect people in situations like that. Here in Lithuania, unfortunately, we found out another face of the government, which did not undertake this mission immediately, and which involved the whole society in a debate on should we help private business? Why should we help businesses? Why is it a role of the government to do that and that? And the very question was very provoking, because before that, you all probably heard how popular in Lithuania was the slogan of welfare creation. Welfare, welfare, welfare. We were repeating many times. And it looked like the welfare comes from the state officials who will take wise decisions, allocate subsidies, every different kind of support to people. And this is the face of the welfare. But immediately in the lockdown, we felt that, hey, welfare is created by our hands, by our decisions, our smart decisions of the entrepreneur who unites resources which are scarce and which all on a separate basis maybe do not cost a lot, but this unique collection, synergy of those resources can create a huge value. This is the way the welfare is created. And suddenly we saw that it is at risk, because in some enterprises the chains of supplies were interrupted, other sectors were locked down by the government, and we saw that the creation of welfare is under a huge risk. And at that time, our officials, unfortunately, were speaking not with the proper respect to the people, and some of the phrases like the fittest will survive and so on, they really became a bad slogan and a wound for the people. And I'm afraid that those wounds cannot be cured very, very easily. So the relationship between the citizen and the state was wounded. And when I was thinking about the condition of people who are now like having to ask alms from the government, I felt it is something wrong with this approach. And that's probably was my personal motivation to think about the property restriction as the main way to resolve this situation, because especially in the lockdown sectors, our property rights were restricted. We could not use our hands, our contracts, our responsibilities, and so actually people were cut of the possibility to take care of themselves. So definitely those who took this decision should be obliged to compensate properly if people are not allowed to go to work. So that was the starting point to build this conception of a proper compensation. And I stressed many times that this is compensation. This is not a subsidy or an alms to the citizens. And why such approach is important? Because if a country is in a very in a situation when the compensations cannot be paid, then the marginal question is, do we dare to risk and die from the virus, or do we dare to die from the lack of food, from not being able to take care of ourselves? So, and you know that in some of the poor countries, that was the word I was missing, poor countries, they really took such a decision not to do any special lockdown and to let people continue work, because the threat of hunger for them was higher than the threat of the virus. And as a humanity, I think it's very important for us to remember such trade-offs, and to really take decisions consciously, and to balance the healthcare risks with the other risks of our welfare situation. So in Lithuania, I think this economic consideration came to the scene a little bit later. And I understand that it was not easy for the government to consider all things at once. So at that time, the healthcare protection was the major consideration. And really, we succeeded in that. The number of disease and the dead people is really very modest in Lithuania, although every life counts, of course. But we were successful, and this brings another argument to the compensation debate, because frequently I could hear from people, those who were working well, who were prospering, maybe even having additional operations, or the people in the bureaucracy who did not suffer any budget salary cuts, but who were able to work on a distant mode. I would hear that, but why we are the taxpayer have to pay for those, poor owners or workers in the hotels, restaurants, and so on? Why we are obliged to do so? So if we look at this healthcare benefit that the whole society gains through the lockdown, and we were not exposed to very huge risks. Our older parents, grandparents didn't suffer as much as in other countries. So as a society, as a taxpayers, probably also we have the obligation and the real solidarity to share the costs of those who had to pay for this because they were locked down. So to put it in a more metaphorical way, they were, keeping the roof of our healthcare system together with the doctors, and everyone appreciated the role of the doctor, the medical sisters, and so on. But the other people also contributed. So, if we are truthful to them, so again, we have the obligation to somehow share the losses. And so, of course, you know that later rather than sooner, the government stepped in, and some measures have been introduced. Why they were so slow, and still we know that the measures carried out through Invega, the state agency, why they were able to allocate about 1/10 of the resources which were available already at the end of March. I dare to say that this slowness only proves that what the enterprises needed was not a credit, because an enterprise in a lockdown sector cannot prove that they have a good business plan, that they have a possibility to return the credit. If we look at the criteria which was created by Invega, it was like, to have enterprise as perfect as this. And in this case, you can give the enterprise a credit. But when the enterprises started to apply to Invega, it showed that they're, more like this or this, and they cannot really move through those criteria which are necessary, which are essential if you are to receive credit. So I dare to say that this proved that what the enterprises needed was a quick subsidy without any condition. And then every enterprises would fit. And the money which were allocated in March, or at least in April, would cost today much more. I mean, that the same money are still on the treasury account. And it looks like the bureaucrats acted wisely, prudently. They didn't give money to anyone who cannot receive, who cannot return. But in the essence of what happened, the money lost their value, because if they were given to the people in need in a proper time, the people would start looking for solutions. And now they all were locked in these long negotiations, signing the questionnaires and so on. And they were locked down in these negotiations, and a lot of conflicts as well. I must return to the conflicts a bit later. So enterprises would be given the money, and they would be freed from this uncertainty, which was huge, and they would start looking for the new solutions. And people as well would receive those money in a prompt time, and they would start looking for the opportunities on the market. What really happened with the other enterprises, those which were not impacted so much, those really behaved very promptly and wisely. We know about the enterprises which started to produce the respiratory apparatus, a lot of these masks and disinfection and a lot of other stuff. And people showed that they're able to act very promptly. And as a paradox, we saw that the bureaucracy is not able to act promptly, and that time, which is the most scarce resource of a human being, somehow is not pressing the government agencies. And I think this is a big challenge which we with the Institute will approach in a new deregulatory campaign which we are now preparing. I should mention that we were also running a multidisciplinary study of scarcity and lack as an overall universal phenomenon, which is everywhere in not only in human life, but in the structure of being. And it brings a lot of insights about how we act and what is the difference between a human being acting on his own responsibility and private property and the one who acts in the bureaucracy, how he is limiting himself from the pressure of scarcity of resources. And the quarantine showed that also he's protected from the pressure of time. Lack of time is not pressing the bureaucracy so much. So those money in Vega, they lost their value eventually, and the sooner the money will be allocated according to a less rigid criteria, the quicker they will be able to help the people. I must admit that one of the most dear moments for me after publishing some articles about this compensation concept was where people who would say, oh, thank you, you saved our dignity, because we felt that something is wrong with this asking for payment from the government and so on. And you know that some sectors were almost living in the parliament, trying to get some special condition and so on. And they say, oh, this conception saved our dignity, because now we know that we are not asking alms, but this is how the relationship between the government and the citizen should be. So for me, I think it was one of the biggest prizes that I got for this thinking and suffering for this conception, because it was not very easy. Another not very easy consideration was the question of the money. As it was mentioned, the Institute was behind the Litas credibility law and currency board, which actually protected the currency from any monetary policy. And Litas was fixed to US dollar in 1994, and then repacked to euro, and eventually this Litas credibility law survived until we joined the euro. So in the crisis of 2009, the major difference was that we had still the national currency, which was sound, protected from any monetary interventions, and which the country really wanted to keep, to safeguard as a sound currency. So the biggest risk at that time was that Litas will devalue, or people thought that if it's such a big crisis, eventually the money will not survive. But the money survived, and the big experiment of Lithuania was that the shrink happens through the shrink of the incomes of the companies, of people, in some sectors up to the quota, or at least 15% was the cut of the real income. And so that was the biggest difference with the crisis today. And today, of course, we are in the joint boat with the euro users, and we learned that other governments compensate their citizens, their companies quite generously, which added an additional argument that if if they are compensating their citizens and we do not do the same to ours, actually we create a huge injustice. Our people are solidarian with the Germans and French and Italians, which is very nice, but please ask them, inform them about this solidarity and why they are not also benefactors of the same solidarity. That was the biggest question. And especially when the information came about the massive issue of euro, massive issue, trillions of euro to support the industries, to extend credits to the loans to the governments and so on. Of course, I had to rethink it and to take a decision that it's not good for Lithuania now not to accept this money, because anyway we are in a joint boat, and if the issue of money creates inflation either in the consumer side or in the value of the assets, of the resources, of the shares and so on, it's not just for us to be below the overall level, and it will not be good for the people. And there is a very basic consideration that when there is an inflation, the one who gets the credit and the one who gets the credit sooner than the others, he is benefited more. And the later you are in this chain of distributing newly printed money or increased amount of money, the more you lose. So this is maybe it's not very idealistic approach, but it's a pragmatic approach, which also shows that in this case, being in the joint boat with the euro users, we better use those funds and those loans. And then it creates another uneasiness how to allocate those money, because I don't like the state being the allocator of resources, especially of capital on the market, because it always creates corruption. It's always connected to some injustice, or in Lithuanian we call it švogerism, because everyone is a cousin to someone. So this is not a very sound model, but I think today we will be challenged by how to do it properly, how to channel those money as quick as possible to the private responsibility, to the private consideration. And you also know that we are now in a constant lack of the banking sector, and there is an initiative to establish a state bank and so on. I remember well the times when we had state-owned banks and how it finished. It was not very nice story. A lot of corruption happened at that time and so on. So again, having some background in the securities market and stock exchange, I also thought that maybe those connections could be improved by issuing securities. Like, it's better if a company issues bonds and this state fund or state bank buys the bonds, and the company gets the necessary capital. I think it is still more protected from the party influence and so on. So I think this is still a question to be considered, and maybe some other countries, maybe some good examples of how to deal with this dilemma. And of course, the government responded by a so-called DNR program, which was released quite recently, and which speaks about allocation of 6 billion euro of the European funds. And one of the main ideas of this program, I think it's excellent because it speaks about the need of the market to allocate production from Asia to Europe, you know, to transfer those production chains closer to the consumer, to the finishing industry. So Lithuania, of course, could benefit a lot if there is really a need of the capital to move. So what should we do? Create very good investment opportunities, very good investment climate. And that's why we propose that those billions are better used not to support specific companies, but to improve the whole business climate, to bring the government institutions to a higher level of automation and so on, and also to maybe temporarily compensate for the tax cuts. You know that the President Nausėda suggested cutting the personal income tax, at least temporarily, but it was not approved by the government. So the basic approach would be that cutting taxes reaches every citizen, every company. So this is as flat intervention of the state as possible. So this is perfect. So if we are afraid that some budget proceeds would decrease temporarily, okay, let's compensate from those billions of European funds. Let's return to the model when the corporate profit tax is not levied on reinvested profits, or let's move to a system similar to Estonian or Latvian, where there is no profit tax, because in this case, who earns the money reinvests without any tax burden. And this is perfect, especially if we say that we have a lack of banks and a lack of credits. So we create a system which already we had in Lithuania until 2002, and which really laid an excellent ground for our productive progress. So let's think about measures which would be flat and reach everyone without corruption, without violation of competition. So that would be the more general approach to how to deal with those money. And of course, if the capital really needs to be reallocated from Asia to Europe, if we improve the conditions here, those private trillions and billions will come to Lithuania. So we don't need to invest governmental money in it. We better provide the capital with a good condition, and of course it will flow in if we succeed. So this is a basic dilemma, I think, for the people in the government, whether to act as businessmen themselves or to really act as on the mission of the government, really to serve everyone. And here I come to probably the most essential, sensitive question. Those in the state authorities, do they really serve us? I think the crisis showed a huge contradiction. Instead of being our servants, people in power and even in small bureaucracies feel like they are ruling us. You know, they act as all-powerful rulers, and people very small people, those who work on the so-called licenses, Verslo-liudijime and so on, those people were suffering when they had to deal with the bureaucracies, and a lot of people were disappointed, and maybe they never, people from culture, they never had to deal with this, bureaucracies, writing requests for money and saying, oh, this number is not correct. Now you go to the register, you pick up some, documents and so on. So people were so badly impacted by this. So the biggest challenge probably, and the biggest lesson from the lockdown for us is how to recover our culture, how to make it so that the people in the serving state sector are really our servants and not the rulers. How to establish this symmetry, because when we deal on the private basis, we are all in the symmetrical condition. You impact me, I am dependent on you. And this dependency makes me better, it protects me from my own sins, bad inclinations, and so on. So I have to be better person. And when this symmetry is lost, we see that some of the bad inclinations of a human being can become institutionalized. And that is really a danger. So these are, in brief, some of the considerations that came after this virus and the lockdown. Of course, this is not all of the fields. And again, as I began with this basic question of a human relationship, really how we deal with each other, how we are important to each other, how now we can feel the value of communication much more than before, when we were taking it for granted. And how much can we improve this communication, and especially those relations with the state, because that people speak that maybe there will be a second wave of the pandemic, and maybe there will be a need for a second lockdown. So my question to you is, would we be, as human beings, scared by the virus, scared by the bats, by the things which we do not control, or the biggest fear could come also from the government sector, from our lack of trust? The government does not trust us, the citizens, and we do not trust the government, and we do not feel protected. And me as an employer, I was reminded by my coacher that you must be very gentle to the people now as you work on a distant manner. Even if people do not deliver perfect action, remember they fear death, they care about their lives and their parents, and they have to cook 3 times a meal for the family and take care of the people. So be gentle, be protective to them. I'm afraid that our people in the government didn't have such a reminding that the main mission of the government is really to help people feel more secure. And let me wish that this lesson will be taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena, very much. A very interesting presentation. I immediately have raised for myself few questions that I would like to ask. But colleagues, do we have questions in our meeting, in our group? Does somebody has a question? Please type a question, or please ask. Okay, let me start with the easy question, but I have few more. This your last topic, you concentrated on the government as serving to society government. That's very important. That touches me. And then I see the clear division between the political government and the professional government. In Lithuania, we have so many evidences that government has been acting in favor of political parties. Well, professionals working for government, as government, I guess they should be more concentrated on the strategy, on delivering strategy and delivering results. But why in the world is so popular, so most often spotted the political governments and so few are professional governments?
I can't speak for the world really, but I think these recent governments in Lithuania, they always had an ambition to be professional governments, and many people came without definite political experience. I mean, the prime minister today is not similar to Andrius Kubilius, who was a long-standing conservative with certain ideas, with certain program, but these people are more accidental. So, and of course, I must admit that there is, if you look on a deeper hidden institutions, there are some institutions which show good effort, and there is a move towards better service to the people, being more customer friendly and so on. But still, this is not an overall mood, and I think for the overall mood, it really must come from the top, really, as a political credo, as a manifesto to the people, as something which would permeate all the laws and bylaws of those institutions. And in this case, this service to the people could become more visible. But that's not an easy topic, and we know also from theory, the public choice theory, and so others, which show that people are still people, even if they are in the authorities, and they still act egoistically, and they look for some benefit, either material or immaterial. And we know that the temptation of honor and power are much more dangerous than the temptation of money. So I'm not very optimistic, but as I mentioned, with the Institute, we have our major efforts to start deregulation campaign, also to look on the lawmaking, because our lawmaking is also in a very devalued condition, I would say, today. And the laws, before they're approved, must be expected, and the possible impact on the society should be forecasted, but it's not done, and evaluation also is not carried out. So that's why we have such an inflation of lawmaking initiative. And we have the responsibility to read all the time, and to get somehow to adjust to these initiatives. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not very optimistic, but I have some ideas how to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So far, I don't see any questions. So let me ask. In the support measures, what government was offering, and especially what government was telling, you support businesses, that businesses will support working places.
Uh-huh.
And that's, in my mind, it's a very big contradiction, because the meaning of the business is not to support working places, but to produce products and services. And only in this perspective, businesses need people to work for them. So I think that my personal idea was that that's a wrong communication or even wrong thinking, that we need to support working places. No, my idea is to support people or to compensate people who lost their jobs. And we have that system for compensation. But by telling businesses you should support working places, you really put pressure on business that they would not do the business. That's my idea. What's your opinion?
Yeah, exactly. You speak as one of my colleagues now, because we also dealt a lot with this question, and I reminded myself during my talk that I have to speak about this huge tension which was created by the government between the employees and the employers, also between the private schools, private kindergartens, and the parents. Also, because those had to deliver the service virtually, and it's not easy to deliver a virtual kindergarten. And the parents had to take care of the kids, and they were angry and didn't want to pay for the service. And especially with these employees and employers tension, our position was also that if the government wants to cares about people, it should compensate people directly. Either they are on a lockdown temporarily, or they lose their job. Direct and also very prompt payment is needed without the interference of the employer. And what happened with this interference, intermediary of the employer, the government was late to transfer funds, but the employees were waiting for the employer to pay today. So it was an incredible tension, and the employer had to deal with the employees who were unhappy with the government questionnaires and so on. Remember that those subsidies for the working places were changed several times and quite substantially changed the conditions, right? So you had to adjust to all of that, and so really in a lot of sectors a huge tension was created. And again, speaking that we are social beings, and for recovery after the crisis, our working together is essential. So how to work together if employee is angry on the employer is, distressed, and he wants to forget all of this, so he doesn't want to take any responsibility, any burden anymore for these, people, for all these contracts and so on. So it was really a mistake, and as you say, it was probably a wrong approach, thinking that employer has this special role, and that in this case we will be able to keep the workplaces. Of course, if the company survives, of course, they need the workers. They cannot without the workers. And just recently, we had a lack of specialists in Lithuania. So if we recover, it will happen very quickly again. Yeah, but those conflicts, again, they added to this lack of trust in the society, and probably that was a bigger wound to us than the healthcare problems.
Thank you. And I have also observation from our audience that the same tension was between the owners of the facilities and tenants.
Oh yes, yeah, that's another one. And on that, again, we explained that if the compensation would be paid proportionally either to the income of the company or to the responsibilities of the company, then the government should not consider separately the rent question, that question, and that question. So there is a lack of, universal thinking, maybe we can say, and maybe the politicians like, to deal with specific problems, and then in this case, people are more dependent on them. Yeah, that's really, we wrote especially that even if you are not able to resolve the problems, at least you should speak and you should induce, peace in the society. But I had no mention from the government or the parliament about, the need of keeping peace between the groups and helping them to do so.
Thank you. And now we got a question. Rima Ingstad is asking your opinion. Which country coped best with the corona crisis, not only from the medical point, but also from the economy point, not too much damage to economy?
As far as I know, it's Germany. Switzerland as well, but from the European Union, it's Germany.
And what was German's model of support or quick support to companies or to people?
As I understand, it was issuing, because as taxpayers, we are all known to the government. So it was either tax inspectorate or another authority which issued amount of 3 months income to the companies without even asking. And then when companies asked to get easy credit with a state guarantee, then they could receive even more to look for new niches on the market and so on. But people were, and also self-employed people, they were surprised, astonished, especially those who are there from our part of the world. They said, wow, I felt, as I really, they care about me, and it was done especially without asking alms. So I think the relationship between the state and the citizen was really improved, and the trust was enhanced. And
now you mentioned that Germany, if I understood correctly, has supported companies according to revenues. And there is another approach, like in Lithuania, we had approach for the micro companies in proportion with the taxes paid, or maybe it could be some like equal donation amount. But this, then here I come with my question to my basic idea of responsibility, what you mentioned in your topic. Then the supporting in proportion with the taxes paid, it also is the manifestation that government recognizes responsibility of the companies to pay taxes. So they get support according to their behavior. Yeah. Isn't the right approach?
Yeah, it's right. But remember, if Germans paid according to the revenues, they also could only calculate legal revenues. So, which means that the taxes also were paid, so they wouldn't contribute for the shadow economy. Yeah. So that's, I mean, there are very different ways to do it, but of course, the essential is to recognize that the regular incomes were cut, that the regular operations were cut, and that also that the company, if it gets the money, it is able to repay their own responsibilities. And what happened in Lithuania, that we were not able to pay each other, and then the chain was growing. So that's again the value of time, being prompt on time. I think it's a proper moment. It's 10 o'clock.
Yeah, thank you. I also see the clock, and really I feel that was very interesting morning. Very good discussion.
Thank
Elena,
you.
thank you so much joining us and sharing your ideas or views. And I hope we will meet each other in the other occasions. And definitely we will invite you to EBN morning business breakfast to see you in our circles.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Colleagues, EBN, dear
Thank you.
colleagues, with this business breakfast with this morning, now we will do the summer break, and we will we will inform you about our next event in September. And I hope it will be the real meeting with real coffee and with real networking. Thank you all for participating to today's meeting. And I wish you a nice summer. It's nothing better to wish than to have a nice vacation and sun shining, good health, keep strong, and let's see each other in a few months.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
very
Gintaras.
Thank you, Gintaras, for moderation. Thank you, and have a good summer.
Goodbye. Have a good summer, you all.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.